This is a special topic webinar from VETtoCEO. We are just thrilled at the topic, and the topic is franchising. As many people that have been associated with VETtoCEO, we talk about three paths to small business ownership: startup, franchising, and buying existing business. And franchising, particularly for veterans, is something we're big fans of because of a lot of reasons we'll get into today. And one of the most premier franchises for veterans is VetCor. I'm going to turn it over to Paul to kick it off. Paul?
Thanks, John, and thanks, Mike, and everybody at Vet to CEO. It's an awesome program. And as I've always said, even if you're not sure about what you want to do in your transition, try the Vet to CEO program. It gives you great opportunities to learn some important skills in civilian business, whether you decide to go into business ownership or not. And it also helps you make that decision. I want to just take the time here to introduce a couple of my teammates. On the upper right there, as you see it, I think as you see it, it's Patrick Summer. Patrick's our vice president for franchise development operations. He's a former Army captain and then has a pretty distinguished career in franchising. And we were glad to have him on our team. So a great resource for you and for us. And I'll make the blanket statement now. If he or I can help you in any way, whether it's respect to franchising, business ownership, or anything like that, please reach out to us. We believe that if we can help veterans like that we're going to find enough veterans who are interested in our story, interested in our brand. And frankly, it's also consistent with our mission to help veterans in transition. And then I'll hold off and introduce my other teammate in a second, but because I'm a retired Army officer and create a presentation, I have to have an agenda. So there it is. That's the stuff we're going to talk about, but we're going to lead it off with a great opportunity to hear from one of our franchisee teammates, John Feely. And there's a little stage setter just to get John to give you a taste of what it means to be a franchisee. John and I have a shared history together. He's a great person. And also he's a great franchisee. He's a former teammate of mine. I was his assistant soccer coach many moons ago. And then he asked to join the team as a franchisee. So I'm going to turn it over to him, let him give you a little spiel about what it's been like as a VetCor franchisee for him. John, thanks for joining us, and over to you.
Awesome. Hey, thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. And it's an honor to be here just to represent a VetCor franchise owner. It's something that has been a great part of my life for the last 4 years, and obviously now for many years in the future. I feel like my story as it relates to VetCor is something that perhaps a lot of people watching can relate to in different ways. And so I wanted to be brief, but I wanted to share a little bit about that. So I purchased a VetCor franchise in just outside of the Tampa area. And at the time, I didn't have any background at all in restoration. So this was a new skill and something new to learn, which excites me. And so there may be some of you guys that do have that knowledge. And obviously, that's a huge plus. But if not, that's where I was. I didn't have a strong background in business. I was actually in education. I was in coaching, but I had done some real estate. And this was just something that I was drawn to. I'm not a veteran, but the culture at VetCor, the shared values and just what that company represents is really what drew me to that as opposed to maybe something else. So my first year as a franchise owner, I was a little bit more of kind of an investor and handled the financial management, but I really wasn't hands-on. I didn't run the office. I had a business partner that did that. And so there might be some people listening and that's the path that might be, best for you. And that worked really well because I was still teaching and I was still coaching and I was able to add this into my life. But then after about a year and a half, I took on a much more active role and I was doing business growth for VetCor for my franchise. I was doing marketing. I was going to jobs. And so I left the classroom and this became more of my full-time job. And it was really at that time that I started to see the full picture of why this fits me so well personally and why it's something that I want to continue to do day in and day out. I would be at jobs, I'd be working with great teammates, but really for me, the key was we were being called out to people's homes when they were going through something to them, a loss of a home or a business, or even if it was just part of the home, that's a really important thing. And we're called out to be there on really sometimes their worst day. and to be able to help them through that difficult time, to be able to get them to the other side of it, to look at each job and say, how can this job be done the best way possible, the most efficient way possible? That's something that really excited me and got me up and going each day. And then there's a lot of companies that will look at people in that situation and, to be honest, say, how can I take advantage of that? Because they're vulnerable, hurricanes and things like that. And so to be able to be there and be a trusted partner to that homeowner or that small business, to be able to be someone that they can be thankful at the end of the day and say, thank God for VetCor. Thank God that you were here. That to me gives me purpose. And that's why I want to just do this full time. And this is now what I do day in and day out. So it's really been something that at different times over the last 4 years has been a different role for me. And in each different kind of situation, it's been perfect fit. But right now, it's something that I get up every morning and I love doing. I love being there for the customers. I love the office that we've created. I actually have 2 offices now. We've been able to grow and help veterans that we've hired and help our communities. And it's just been a great experience. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that's brief, but I'm excited to be here and excited to be part of the VetCor team. And anything I can do to help you or share with you guys, I'll be happy to do that.
John, thanks so much. Appreciate it. And John's going to stick around at the end here too for questions and answers. We appreciate you, John. I want to move into now. This is a presentation. It's a combination of presentations, one that I've given multiple times on franchising 101 for veterans. And we're going to start out big picture and neck it down to the opportunity with respect to VetCor, but it's intended to be educational in nature and orient you to franchising first and then to the potential for VetCor as a franchise. So I've had the opportunity. I've been retired now a little over 10 years. I'm in Tampa, Florida, and I get to meet with a lot of transitioning veterans being so close to MacDill Air Force Base, and it's my passion. And so what I've found is, starting with this lesson learned, everybody asks what you want to do when you transition out of military service. And I had a challenge with that because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I started probably 5 years ago or so, I stopped asking what you want to do. I started asking what's important to you. Because inevitably, when you ask what you want to do, and many of us don't know, you start fishing for things. And thing comes up with things like compensation or what position you want, et cetera. And oftentimes we don't know. But when you start thinking about what's important to you, that creates a totally different picture. It opens up your aperture and you find things. I usually get things like, I want quality of life. I want to remain in Tampa, or I want to be in the Southeast United States. I want to be close to my elderly parents. I want to be close to my kids at college, or good school system for my younger kids, things like that. I want to be part of something bigger than myself, part of a team that has shared common values. And so, one, that's the first thing I encourage you to think about. And then as I've been franchising, I found this great diagram that really covers it. And we'll go into more detail, but generically, if you can find the intersection of what you love doing, what the world needs, what you're going to be paid for, and what you're good at, then you've truly found your sweet spot. And that's purpose. And I find a lot of people that want to help veterans and so they want to start a nonprofit. The challenge is, how do you get paid to do that? Nonprofit requires a lot of fund development and things. Can you really make that work? Because if you can't make that work, then it's just a hobby. So there are all kinds of advantages and also intricate definitions about when you look at things like this. What you love doing. You may not love restoration, but be careful. You may love being in the gym because you're a gym rat, but that doesn't necessarily mean you want to buy a gym franchise, because you're not the one that's going to be doing the personal training and all, like, for example. So we'll delve more into that. And we'll talk about it at the end of this presentation as I walk you through this for considerations. But this is something that really has helped me focus and talk about things like this with franchisees. And I found it very helpful. Let's start with some basics about franchising. And really, I'm more, but I run and operate the local Tampa office, which is a company owned store. And so a franchisor grants the franchisee the right to use the brand, intellectual property in a specific geographical area, typically known as a territory. And in our case, it's a protected territory. You may see places like McDonald's as a franchise, where there's a McDonald's and a quarter mile away, there's another McDonald's, and they don't necessarily have territories. But in our case with home services, we have defined territories. Really, you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself. What does that mean? I, as the franchise or CEO, I can't tell you who to hire and who to fire. I can give you some guidelines. I can give you some lessons learned and some scars that I've learned, which is generally, I think, has been pretty helpful for franchisees. But you're still the CEO of your independently owned and operated franchise. It's just the franchise itself gives you some head start, particularly with the brand, particularly with the knowledge and how to get started in the industry. I like to tell people, I think franchising is all about training, standardizing, and replicating. Any institutions that have a good reputation at those things. I think the U.S. military probably has the best reputation as the largest organization in the world who excels at it. And I think it's one of the reasons why veterans excel. With franchising, you get relationships. So you get relationships for business operation, you get relationships for support and administration. We've already tested the organizations that are helping you with your payroll, with your insurance, kind of things like that. And then you're expected to go develop your own relationships locally in your own territory. And I like to say it comes with recipes for success. Many people in the United States think franchising is so great for veterans because we follow orders well and we follow SOPs. And yeah, I believe that's true. But particularly with the US military, we're known to see the initiative and take orders and make them better and follow commander's intent. So you start with those orders, you start with those operations and SOPs, and you make them better. And we have things like a local marketing playbook that says, here's how you go about doing this, but you've got to execute it given the conditions in your local area. And then if you think about it in terms of a military operation, and you've got franchisees with territories all over the place, say almost like operational areas, you can talk to your franchisees to the left and to the right of you. And the better each one of you do, the better the brand excels. And so in our case, we do a lot of work with insurance companies. And when we do a great job in Tampa, we may have insurance adjusters who also cover Sarasota. And so the better we do in Tampa supports our teammates in Sarasota because it represents the brand. At the same time, we may be able to share lessons learned because we're not competing with Sarasota. We can say, hey, here's a great idea, or vice versa. So it's this ability to share across with adjacent units, if you will, in the military. And then I'll just touch on this. And if you're interested, certainly Patrick and I can tell you more. The basics of franchising is all covered. If any company wants to franchise, they must file a franchise disclosure document, FDD. And that's, Patrick will correct me if I'm wrong, I think 23 standard paragraphs, which turns out to be like a 200-page document. But it says things like, how much is your initial investment? Item 19, what are the financial performance representations? What's the training available? All these types of standard things that every franchisor must disclose in that document. And then there are also 13 registration states that require some additional filings based on local and state rules and regulations in those states. This is a summary. John and I talk about this a lot with VETtoCEO. And one of the things that I found, because I got hired to start VetCor first, and we weren't franchising, and I was hired to start it as the president. I wasn't the owner. So it's based on my experience there, and then becoming the owner, and then starting as a franchisor and watching my franchisees. I think the two greatest challenges are really financing the business and growth and getting the business. People say, don't fall in love with your idea. You may have the greatest widget or service to offer people, but you still got to get it to market. So the financing piece is something that we don't have a whole lot of experience in, is transitioning veteran, because we weren't working for a for-profit organization. We weren't having to worry about making payroll. And in many cases, like one of the things that I was like shocked to understand is cash flow. If you start out just booming and let's say you run into a storm like happens, and what we do is really home services, not necessarily just storm related, but take, for example, you have a storm, a tornado, a flood, a hurricane or something, and you get a ton of business right away. You have to fund, as the business owner, you have to be able to fund that business until you get paid. And we get paid in pretty reasonable time frames. But you have to, in our case, oftentimes with insurance jobs, we get paid within 30 days. That's a pretty reasonable time to get paid. But when you think about it as a business owner, if you're doing a payroll every 2 weeks, that could be 2 or 3 payroll cycles before you get paid on that job. And so understanding things like accounts receivable, accounts payable, understanding what your break even analysis is and those types of things, those are all hard. And one of the great things about partnering with VetTheCEO is they do a great job in helping educate people about things like that. And then the whole piece of getting the business or marketing. And if you wanted to start John Feely's restoration company, you could probably do it. And John, because he's a smart guy, he could figure it out on his own, probably a little bit more difficult than having the infrastructure to train and help him in that. But what you don't have is that name associated with that. And in many cases, particularly with restoration work, in order to get work from insurance companies and things called TPAs, third party administrators, you have to have an existing brand. Or if you were John Feely's restoration company, you would have to be in business 3 years before you're able to get on some of those programs. So it's another benefit of franchising when you start with a well-known brand. There was a study done several years ago, why veterans aren't in business like they were. Post World War II, something like 95% of veterans coming home from World War II became small business owners. The post 9/11 generation is closer to 5%. Now, in franchising itself, there's about 17% of franchisees are veterans and they outperform their peers. So that's interesting because because even though we're not as represented as highly as we were in business, we're represented higher than our general population in franchising. And what the study concluded was basically veterans are concerned about risk and they're concerned about financial risk, operational risk. But what I've found in my transition from the military, understand risk much better than the average person, because even if you had run a rifle range, you had to identify the components of risk, which are probability, severity, and how to mitigate those things. And people have this misunderstanding that they want to get a job and they're going to get a corporate job with a Fortune 500 company even. You don't know if that company is about to be sold to a PE firm. You don't know if it's about to you don't know if it's about to be go into a major lawsuit. So there's risk there. You just don't know about it. So in the end, the risk with the franchisee is the business owner. Ask John, I'll tell you, I think I'm probably aware of almost every risk there is because I'm in it every day. So the question is, would you rather be in a large organization with someone else who's less qualified to manage risks that you're not aware of? Or would you rather be responsible for your own future and manage the risks that you are aware of? So let me get into some best practices. I think it's important you begin with the end in mind. If you're not willing to do a good pro forma upfront to talk about break even analysis, how much money you need then, and begin with the end in mind. If you're not willing to do it upfront, you're darn sure not going to be able to do it when you're in the middle of a cash flow crisis, either good or bad, because you got so much business that you got to figure out how to fund the business, how to fund the cash flow, things like that. So if you start out, I was a combat engineer, start out with actions on the objective and backward plan, figure out where you're going to use all your breach assets or whatever the case is. You begin with the end in mind. That's a good strategy. And we talked about the pro forma. Oftentimes we don't give ourselves enough credit as veterans understanding the financial piece. But if you think about what the intelligence requirements are, market research, and again, VetTheCEO does a great job with this, it'll help you determine what you know, what you don't know, and what you have to go find out. And I have a whole presentation on how to do that, how to develop a pro forma. You know, be fiscally conservative up front and turn any observations, any assumptions into fact. And then you want to develop key performance indicators so that you can track your budget, track your metrics as you go, so you can understand your financial statements, profit and loss, break even analysis, things like that. And the franchise itself is a proven concept. And many franchisees fail when they want to buy a business, buy a franchise, and then go run it independently. If you're that entrepreneurial minded, maybe be an entrepreneur, not a franchisee, because they're two different things. You have to stay within a system as a franchise, but it also gives you some significant advantages to mitigating that risk. And then cash is king. You got to manage that cash flow and communicate with the franchisor, communicate with the franchisees to the left and to the right of you, as well as your teammate. I'm going to get into a little bit more about VetCor itself and RY, which is one of the most important. It is the most important thing, frankly, for me. And I'm going to build the slide, and thanks to John who helped me build it. We started this because I personally had a challenge in transition. It's a crazy story for another time, but how I got involved in this is a licensed professional engineer, former battalion commander that transitioned to Tampa. And I had trouble finding a job because people didn't understand me. And we've created now this ecosystem, this company where we do understand you as veterans. And by the way, it's veterans and those who share similar values because we don't want to necessarily just isolate us. We want to get people who are like-minded, like veterans on the team as well, so they can help us understand the transitions and transition to the civilian world much cleaner, much more effectively and efficiently. Uh, my last job in the Army, I was the dean of the Army Engineer School, and I understand these challenges, another presentation for another time. But oftentimes we don't get the same types of civilian credentials that people do in industries like ours. For example, plumbers, carpenters, electricians, it's a states' rights issue. You leave the military, often you don't have a license. Guess what? In this industry in restoration, the credentialing authorities, it's a national training certification. They become ICRC, Institute of Inspection, Cleaning, Restoration certified as a technician. And so it's a much easier job with credentials. We want to change the narrative. I can't prove this for a fact, but when I give presentations, I ask people, what are the two most common words associated with the word veteran? And when I ask people to think about it, I often get disabled and homeless. And I'd like to change that narrative to veteran business owner, veteran entrepreneur, vetrepreneur, and change that narrative of what we think. You hear this statistic of 22 a day, which by the way has never been completely accurate, but we'd like to talk about how we enable veterans with opportunities and not give them handouts for things. We're trying to create some meaningful employment where we're helping others in their time of need, but also people are part of a team and part of something bigger than themselves. Because we believe that if we give them opportunities and create opportunities instead of handouts, that's really what helps people get integrated into their communities and help build long, sustainable careers where they're much more happy. And then a path to business ownership. When we started franchising in 2019, we said, man, one, veterans hire more veterans. It's statistically proven. And so the more the more franchises, the more opportunities we create for VetCor offices, the more opportunities we have to hire people. But also now we're giving veterans the opportunity to build value, to build wealth, and to pass it on to family members or to create opportunities to sell it and sail off into retirement as good business owners. And we want to stimulate that growth in business ownership like we had post World War II. And then imagine the veteran population is declining in the United States. You probably know that because we're at a point in history where 0.5% of the population are are active duty, right? And doesn't look like that's going to change anytime soon unless we have World War III. So the birth rate in the United States is going up. The veteran rate is going down. And so we're continuing to grow farther and farther apart from the society that we serve, protect, and defend. It just is what it is based on the demographics of the company. Now, what if we have this opportunity to get into people's homes in their time of need and somebody shows up fit, polite, treats them with dignity and respect and represents a brand called VetCor? We have more opportunities to reach out and spread that brand of who we are and what we're about. As I talked about, vets hire more vets, and then it becomes a snowball to create more opportunities and then less challenges with transition, more opportunities for them to build sustainable careers, et cetera. And then ultimately, I have a ton of people that want to help vets and they want to start not for profit. And that's just a hard thing to do. But if you become a business owner and you generate a successful business, you can have the decision at your discretion to donate to veterans charities, veterans service organizations, veteran not-for-profits, or be the guy that's in the American Legion and one of your brothers or sisters gets hospitalized and needs a wheelchair and has trouble with the bureaucracy or something. And I've seen that here locally. And you can be the business owner that strokes them a check and takes care of those needs. And that's the kind of ecosystem that we want to create. So this is just a timeline and a little bit about a brief history. The bottom line is we've been in restoration for 11 years now, and we've been franchising for 5 years. And you'll be able to see these slides in more detail. We've won some pretty significant awards along the way because of what we've done and who we've represented and how we've conducted our business. We've participated in a lot of storms here in Florida and elsewhere. Excuse me. Excuse me. And it also tracks our growth with franchisees. So it's a good reference to have, but the bottom line is we're not new at this and we're growing and we want to continue to grow just to help for all those reasons I just discussed. People think about restoration and they think about like disaster response, which is a huge part of it. But what I really want to talk about is really why we are differentiators here. But it first starts to understand that we are in a recession, pandemic, inflation proof home services industry. What does that mean? The most common things we do on a daily basis are dishwashers, ice makers, hot water heaters, air conditioning units, roof leak because of storms or a tree falls on the roof, etc. Kitchen fires, mold remediation, just about anything that you would need to file a home insurance claim for, we do as part of the services that we offer. And that's important when we go back and we'll talk about it at the end here about can you get paid for it? Do people need it? Can they perform it themselves? And generally the answer is they can't do it themselves, but they need help. And so when you think about what differentiates us, it's a brand of veterans. What I tell people is don't use VetCor because we're primarily veteran owned and veteran operated. That'd be a handout. But think about it. When's the last time you had a service call of any kind in your own home? In Florida, I use air conditioning repairman, but call it the cable guy or whoever, a plumber. When did they tell you they were going to be at your house? And when I asked that question, I already know the answer. It's probably like a 4-hour window, 8 to 12. And then they showed up 30 minutes late and didn't call in advance. And we're just not wired that way. We're wired that early is on time and on time is late. I think veterans and Vince Lombardi are known for that saying. The other piece is when you think about restoration, it's really about command and control of small unit level operation. Why do those home services and other brands and other industries to give you a 4-hour window? Because they're not good at executing command and control of small unit level leadership. And again, with our brand, because we primarily hire former non-commissioned officers of the U.S. military to be our mid-level managers, I don't know any of them that can't get a group of guys and a group of gals to be at the right place, the right time, the right kit to perform their mission. So it's a differentiator for us. And then I talk about veterans in whether it's a roof leak or whether you wake up in 2 a.m. to go get a drink of water from your ice or from your water maker or your water distributor and it's attached to your refrigerator and you realize that the water line has kinked and you're standing in 2 inches of water. It's a disaster in your home or whether it's a natural disaster as a result of a hurricane. At that point in time, it's a disaster in your home, which is oftentimes our most valuable resource. People want help. They want reliable help. And you think about who you want to call. It's somebody like a veteran that you can trust. And I always tell people it's better to know us and not need us than need us and not know. So our brand speaks to who we are as veterans. And we tell people is don't use us because we're primarily veteran owned, veteran operated. But because we're primarily veteran owned and veteran operated, we differentiate our level of service. And that's why you should use it. So as I talked about franchising, all about training, standardizing, and replicating, as a result of that, we have solid relationships with insurance carriers and TPAs, third-party administrators. And we've earned that reputation over 11 years through solid performance and also, frankly, through a lot of the disasters that we've helped a ton of people with. And as a result of that, if you become a VetCor franchisee, you can get credentialed when you go through it's a PMP, project management plan, that we set you on a path for anywhere from 90 days to say 6 months after you sign a franchise agreement. You go through all these things to get your credentials, your training, your certificates of insurance, et cetera. You get credentialed so that when you turn the lights on, you are eligible to receive jobs from these carriers and TPAs from companies like Allstate, State Farm, USAA, particularly in Florida where the insurance market is crazy. It's very diversified. There are over 250 home insurance carriers in Florida as well. But it translates to other states as well because we have those big name brands here. We've done well. And because you can get credentialed with those TPAs, you can get on board with Liberty Mutual and things like that through these TPAs known as like Contractor Connection, Cedric Repair System, Alacrity Solutions, AccuServe, Code Blue, Hancock Claims. And they have been great partners with us in helping us with our growth. And then lastly, with the franchising piece, franchisees, as I stated, outperform their peers in franchising. And so as we outperform our peers and we have a greater number portion of franchisees, our system itself is going to it's going to respond better. And I already talked about the last one, risk management, because I think inherently we are better risk managers with the people we're recruiting. And that ties into catastrophic response. And so we've built this reputation through 8 of the last 9 years, having responded to major hurricanes in Florida or the Gulf Coast. And we allow our franchisees, no matter where you are, to deploy and ride to the sound of the gun. Because when catastrophes happen, there's never enough service providers to service that area because nobody can staff to that level consistently. So we allow, even if you're in, say, Connecticut or Michigan, whatever, and you want to come down and ride in the sound of the guns and help people in their time of need, you can come down for a month and sling roof tarps, whatever, because then we manage that as a VetCor franchise system. We carve up little sub territories and we allow people to get to work. So it's a benefit to our carriers, TPAs, because we make ourselves bigger than what we are in the affected areas. It's a benefit to the franchisees. So they have opportunities to make a lot of cash in a short period of time, helping a ton of people. And then as a result of that, reputation provides great value to our partners as well as our franchisees. We talk very briefly about our values, but it's not a brief topic. I could go on forever because I'm passionate about it. But we have a little kind of acronym there, aspire to greatness. And our values: accountability, service, pride, integrity, respect, and excellence. It really helps attract people like you, as our potential franchisees, but it helps attract customers and clients as well, because we represent those values that are known to be shared with veterans itself. And so as I start to conclude here, I'm gonna bring us back to this slide that talks about the sweet spot that I call it. And I'll just go into, what do you love doing? You don't have to love restoration. And what I tell people is, if they're interested in a franchise, love the brand, because as the franchisee and the business owner, you're about representing the brand. And so for us, it's helping veterans and other people in their time of need. It's being part of something bigger than yourself. It's being part of a highly successful team that has a great reputation, and then representing those veterans' values, both with respect to our company and our team, but also the veteran community at large. And then when you think about what the world needs, I say, be careful. You wouldn't want to be one of those people that bought a blockbuster franchise as Netflix was coming around, right? And so you want to be able to look around the corner. And so for us, what we say is recession-proof, pandemic-proof, inflation-proof industry. People who have appliances, water appliances, they're always going to break. And there are some things, potential disruptors out there. We want to get involved in the sensor technology. So when we go out for a hot water heater that's broken, we take care of the water loss, and then perhaps we install one of the sensors below it that has a Bluetooth capability to connect to the main water valve in the house and shut that off. So we're staying in touch with potential disruptors for the industry, but it's things that you want to make sure that the world is going to continue to need. I'll give you an example. When you go into a house and let's say you have hardwood floors or some material, how do you know when that floor gets wet? How do you know when it's dry? Well, there's a thing called the Dumb Horse Moisture Meter Pro. It's about the size of your telephone. It costs about $1,000, and people don't have that. So I asked them, how do you know when something is truly dry? How do you know you haven't overdried it, particularly with things like hardwood floors that are going to cause damage if you overdry it, or cause mold if you don't get all the water out? So they're going to continue to need those types of services because they just don't have that technology. It's not something you can rent overnight. You can go out and rent some dryers and try and do it yourself. But if you do, and with usually people's number one asset, their homes, it's a pretty big risk. And so it's something that the world is going to continue to need. What can you get paid for? Again, I talked about recession proof, pandemic proof, et cetera. One of the things people learn in franchising is don't buy a quick service restaurant now without a drive-through. They learned that through COVID. Well, the good thing here is because we have partnerships with insurance carriers and the TPAs, those teams have great credit ratings. The American dream is still to own a home. And unless you're independently wealthy and you can buy cash for that home, you have to have a mortgage. If you have to have a mortgage, you generally have to have home insurance that covers that mortgage. And because we're working with home insurance carriers, and what they want to do is they want to pay us directly because we get out there and we stop the bleeding and stop claims from getting too large. And so it's a great industry that we can get paid for with these great partnerships that we have. And then lastly, what are you good at? You don't have to be good at restoration. You have to be good at forming teams. You have to be good at building teams, at managing teams, at leading people. You have to be good at following SOPs and making them better. You have to be good at creating reputations and relationships with people. What I tell veterans is, particularly veterans who are going out, because we're not really great at selling also, to go out and have hundreds of cups of coffee with insurance agents, adjusters, realtors, property managers, apartment managers. Tell them who we are. Tell them it's better to know us and better to know us and not need us and not know us. And just create those reputations so you're there when they're ready. And veterans can tell stories and veterans can represent their teams well. And so it's a different way to look at this slide and achieve your sweet spot. Lastly, just some parting thoughts. Undercapitalization is failure. It's all about the cash. We're not asking for entrepreneurs. In fact, we don't want entrepreneurs. You're really renting a brand, but we want you to be part of the brand and make it better. A perfect franchisee is not a 10 on the 1 to 10 entrepreneur scale. We want entrepreneurial minded franchisees. And then it's a kind of a way to accelerate your business through those SOPs that are already there. And that's why I talk about the easy button for becoming a business owner. There's nothing easy about being a business owner, but it's the easy your button I would submit. We talked about the disruptors to look at out there. And this is another thing that veterans don't discuss. They don't understand shifting post-tax expenses to pre-tax. So I have this really cool VetCor Jeep. I love the Jeep. VetCor pays that car payment. So I don't have to pay myself, then get taxed on that salary and then pay that car payment. It's actually an expense for the company that gets deducted that lowers my tax burden, just as an example. And then as a business owner, you're building equity in yourself for an exit plan eventually. And that exit plan could be passing it along to your kids or making a sale at the end to sell your business, but you're getting paid along the way. You can take distributions along the way as a business, and you're creating something with value that has monetary value as well as intrinsic value to make you feel good. And if you're willing to work hard up front and build a good team, you can really get that thing humming and build high quality of life and transition to an absentee owner if you want, or buy a second franchise, a third franchise. You'd be amazed at how many millionaires there are out there who own franchises. I had no idea until I transitioned to this world. And lastly, love the brand, not the widget, as I mentioned, because we want people working on the business, not in the business. And so many business owners fail because they get sucked in and they don't see the bigger purpose and keep an eye on their P&L, their balance sheet, and where the business is going, where it should be going. So those are the things I wanted to cover with all of you. We'll turn it back over to John for Q&A. But again, there's my contact information. There's Patrick's contact information. And if you're interested in franchising or what we're doing in general, happy to discuss, follow up with you, but also would love to discuss opportunities to go on a ride and on the journey and see if you want to become part of our team. Along that way, if Patrick guides you through that process, he'll connect you with John and other teammates of ours, franchisees who are also available, but John's available here to answer questions as well. Over.
Okay. The first question is the big question. How much is the investment cost to start?
I'll ask Patrick to chime in here too. That's a great question. What I tell people is if you're interested, it's a little more complicated than just giving a simple answer, but franchisors have to talk to you about what's in the FD. And so ours is a range. It's a menu. For example, if you want to buy all your vehicles or if you want to lease your vehicles, if you want to buy your equipment, or if you want to lease your equipment. In general, what I tell people is in the neighborhood of 250,000. And also the other piece is that doesn't have to be your money. In fact, we recommend it's not your money. Use other people's money through things like SBA loans, conventional loans, or there's other things that Patrick can talk about too, of converting your IRAs and things into transition. Oh, shoot, I forget the name of it. Patrick probably knows it, but the way to invest in your own business with your own IRA and things. Patrick, anything else I missed?
No, so I would say that average is right in the middle of our range. Again, and financing for vehicles or equipment will put you in the lower end. Certainly, if you're interested in next steps, in our first presentation, we'll walk through by line item everything that goes into that. We do have a discount off the franchise fee for veterans, as well as anybody who's gone through the VETCEO program. So happy to discuss that in detail. with
Very
everybody.
good. Very good. Thank you, Patrick. Next question is, can you talk about markets that are not affected by hurricanes and other natural disasters? You talked about refrigerator leaks and those other things. Talk a little bit more about some of those other homeowner things that can happen.
Yeah, the things, and I'll ask John to chime in here too. The things that we deal with on a regular basis: dishwashers, ice makers, hot water heaters, air conditioning units, etc. And when you think about the things that happen in different parts of the country, so for example, the Northeast, freeze and thaw and broken pipe, that happens more frequently up there. When you start looking around like the Mason-Dixon line, changes in construction standards, you don't necessarily need to have a major freeze, but something that goes under the freeze level that creates frozen pipes. I remember in the areas around Atlanta a couple of years ago, huge disasters there. There was the winter storm in Texas, which created huge challenges. There are tornadoes in the Midwest that create roof damage and then subsequently roof leaks. So every part of the country has different problems where you have high humidity, you have high mold concentration, we have air conditions, you have less mold, but greater potential for fire, for example, or for irrigation system that break and require fixing. So all kinds of things. And in almost anything that requires an insurance claim, we can do. John,
And
anything else?
do you have specialized training that's associated with each of these things? Because a roof leak is vastly different than something related to hurricane damage. Can you talk a little bit about specialized training?
Yep. So we have our own specialized training in VetCor, and then we also rely on industry standard stuff, the IICRC training. For example, one of the things that's required for a franchisee is they have to have somebody who's WRT ASD, Water Damage Restoration Training Applied Structural Drying certified. The only way you can teach that class is if you have a flood house. And we don't have one of those.
Yeah.
So it's an outsourced thing. It's a 5-day class. We point them into the direction on how to schedule that with some of the main training facilities around the country. Then there are all kinds of other ICRC training, like the WRT, which is a 3-day class, microbial training, fire and smoke remediation training, carpet cleaning, all those kinds of things. And
Yeah.
so we use the industry standards to do that. But then internally, we have our own training within VetCor, and we use our franchisees to help do that as well and explain procedures, how to do. For example, we've learned when we do roof tarps, now the best way to do them, one, you've got to take the tarp up to the ridge of the roof. We want to roll up furring strips around the edges to create rigid edges, and then we attach sandbags to them, but they're about half full. For the sandbags, about 35 pounds instead of 50, so you don't have to carry 50 pounds up on a roof. And you attach it with a zip tie to the furring strip, things like that we've learned that we pass along. And all that is part of the training from required to before you get to grand opening.
Very
John,
good.
anything else to add on any of those?
I would just say that obviously major storms are a great opportunity to do a lot of jobs in a short amount of time and really be there to help the community. But one thing I love about this business is there's so many different types of jobs, and every day there's something new that you are taking on as a challenge. And I have a big family. I have family all over the country, and in every state that I have someone in my family that lives in that state, there's something that area is going through. And then anybody who's a homeowner knows that every few years, there's something in your house that you're going through. So your potential client base, even taking away storm related stuff, is anybody that owns a home, especially condos, apartments, rental, Airbnb and VRBO. That business is huge now. Your potential client base is everywhere and almost everything. So it's a lot.
Let's
Yeah.
back up. sewage that, backs up. We've had hoarders, you name it.
It all goes back to what you were talking about, Paul, of making sure that you're out there and people know how to reach out to you. That's the big thing. Can you how you ramp up to a franchise? How long does it take to get open? What are the steps to go down? What's the path to that, and how long it takes?
Patrick, you want to take that?
Yeah, Paul touched on a little bit of this already in terms of the outside training requirements with IICRC. You'll then go through our training program within VetCor. But I would say for most people in this business specifically, it's going to be financing. So for somebody that's coming in, if they're going to do an SBA loan, we can get you through training pretty quickly. We can get vehicles and equipment ordered. SBA is probably what's going to be slow people down if they're going that route. But I would say typically from the date of decision and signing a franchise agreement to opening, 3 months is realistic, which is much faster than a lot of other franchise or business opportunities out there that are more brick and mortar focused, where you're spending months on real estate construction. So yeah, I would say 3 to 4 months, probably a realistic timeline.
Yeah, and you're really not in control of the loan program that you're talking about. The FDA has specific requirements, and your preferred lender probably has specific requirements. So I'm certain that can add a lot of time to that period that you just suggested there, Patrick. Thank you for that.
Mike, I just add, there's no rush, right? But when they're open, we want to make sure they're open and optimized. Because when you open, and what we try and do when we walk them through that PMP, for example, is when you open, you're starting to spend cash, right? So you want to
Right.
make sure you've crossed all those I's, dotted those T's, you have all your credentialing done, all your training done. So you have maximum opportunity to maximize revenue generation.
Yeah.
And so we try, for example, we'll say, hey, your phase 2 training, it's your final training before you're ready to get open, is nudged right up against that grand opening ceremony that we have. We call it an activation ceremony with core. Why is that? Because we need your team. We need your technicians there, because we're going to train them on how to do the restoration jobs, right? We don't have to start paying the technicians until as late in possible, because labor typically is your number one cost.
Right.
So we don't want to rush to failure, but we want to decisively plan that out. And what Patrick helps us do through the kind of the project management plan, and say, hey, what is your desired date, grand opening? Typically 3 to 6 months, but you tell us, and then we'll backward plan to get you there, so that when you turn those lights on, you're fully credentialed, you're fully ready to generate revenue.
Very good. Can you talk about some of the commercial or industrial jobs or accounts that a franchisee would typically have?
Yeah. So a couple things. We have relationships with large companies, like I mentioned, the TPAs and insurance carriers. So we consider them clients, with the customer being the individual homeowner. And that's a good place to be, because they're great for referral sources as well. In restoration, you can also do commercial work, which is large jobs like strip mold or things like that, or Home Depots whose fire suppression system goes off. We caution against those, because given my experience, you don't want to do those until you're really mature as a franchise. Because what happens in the insurance world is you got cash flow of that, because those larger jobs require more resources. And while it's great to have $100,000, $200,000 job on the books, accounts receivable, it's still accounts receivable till you get that money in the bank. And so those jobs typically tend to take a little bit longer. So we're careful about that. And what we want to get to the point where we can handle that with perhaps multiple franchisees, or VetCor as the franchisor, kind of command and controlling that. And then we can also work in some finance options to do that. So in general, it sounds like great opportunities, but we also want to be sure that we're mature enough and ready enough to the franchise system and individual franchisees to take on larger.
Very good. So that's about it for questions. I'll pass it back over to John.
I appreciate that. But at VettoCEO, we like to be timely, so we're going to chop it off here. On behalf of everybody present today, I want to thank you for attending. And if you're watching the recording, thank you for doing that. And we look forward to speaking with you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Patrick. And thank you, Mike. Have a good day.